Daniel and Emily Whitaker were the picture of a perfect sibling duo. He, the quiet, disciplined older brother. She, the joyful, spirited little sister everyone adored. But on one chilling October night, that perfect image shattered. Emily vanished without a trace, and as the town of Pine Hollow searched desperately for answers, a dark truth began to surface, one that no one could have imagined hiding behind Daniel's calm eyes. Daniel Whitaker had the kind of life that seemed picture-perfect from the outside. In the small town of Pine Hollow, Oregon, he was known as the Golden Boy. At just 14 years old, Daniel was everything a parent could want in a son: polite, well-mannered, and always eager to help. He earned straight A's without much effort. His teachers often spoke of his maturity, and he showed a level of discipline rare for someone his age. On weekends, he played second base for the town's junior baseball team, where he wasn't the strongest player, but was certainly the most dependable. He was the kid who never talked back, who remembered to say thank you, and who always looked adults in the eye when they spoke. Pine Hollow was the kind of town where nothing ever really happened. Tucked between low hills and thick forests, it had one diner, one school, and a general store where everyone gathered on Saturdays. The biggest news in recent years had been the mayor's dog winning a state fair ribbon. In this quiet, close-knit community, Daniel stood out for all the right reasons. His family lived in a modest, two-story home near the edge of town. His father, Michael, was a mechanic. His mother, Teresa, worked part-time at the local clinic. They were a normal, hard-working family, respected and liked by neighbors. Daniel had a younger sister, Emily. She was 9, loud, curious, and full of life. Where Daniel was reserved and thoughtful, Emily was the spark that lit up a room. She made friends easily, and had a knack for drawing animals in a way that seemed far beyond her years. The two siblings seemed close. There were no known arguments, no signs of trouble. They walked to school together, shared snacks, and sometimes even played board games in the living room with their parents. If there were any signs of something darker lurking under the surface, no one saw them. To most people, Daniel was a model child. He helped elderly neighbors carry groceries. He volunteered to clean up after community events. During the summer, he mowed lawns for a few dollars, saving every penny in a small metal tin under his bed. His teachers said he showed signs of brilliance in math and science. He was quiet in class, but always listened, always did his homework, and never missed a deadline. His room was clean, his clothes were folded, and he kept a strict bedtime. On Sundays, he sat in the front pew at church, dressed neatly, singing hymns without hesitation. No one had a bad word to say about him. But beneath that image of the perfect boy, there were things no one noticed, or perhaps didn't want to. Daniel didn't have any close friends. He rarely joined in on birthday parties or sleepovers. When other kids stayed late after school for clubs or sports, Daniel went home. His teachers chalked it up to shyness. His parents called him mature for his age. But there were moments, small, quiet ones, that hinted at something deeper. A classmate once mentioned how Daniel would stare at the classroom fish tank for entire periods, seemingly lost in thought. A neighbor noticed him standing in the yard some nights, just staring into the woods behind the house. His baseball coach once said Daniel had too much intensity for a kid, though he didn't elaborate. Still, no one was alarmed. After all, he was just a boy. A quiet, well-behaved, bright boy from a good family. On the night of October 18, 2004, The Whitakers went to bed like they always did. The air had a chill to it, the last traces of autumn hanging on before winter set in. Emily had school the next day, and Daniel had an early baseball practice. The lights in the house went out at 9 p.m. sharp. The streets outside were still, the wind rustled the trees, and somewhere in the woods, an owl hooted. Nothing seemed out of place. But by morning, everything had changed. The Whitakers awoke to find Emily's room empty. Her bed was neatly made. Her favorite stuffed bear sat upright on the pillow. The window was locked from the inside, and her shoes were still by the door. There were no footprints in the yard, no broken glass, no noise during the night. The perfect town was about to wake up to a nightmare. And at the center of it all was Daniel, the boy who had never done anything wrong. The morning of October 19th, 2004, started like any other in Pine Hollow, but inside the Whitaker home, panic had already taken hold. Teresa Whitaker discovered the empty bed first. Emily's room was spotless. The pink bedspread was pulled tight, her school bag still hung on the hook by her desk, and her favorite bear, Mr. Buttons, was sitting neatly at the head of the bed, exactly how she left it every night. But Emily was gone. There was no sign of her anywhere in the house. At first, her parents thought she might have woken up early and wandered outside. It wasn't like her, but what else could explain her disappearance? They called her name around the house, then in the yard, then on the street. No answer. Within an hour, Michael called the police. When officers arrived, they found no signs of forced entry. All the doors and windows were locked from the inside. There were no broken latches, no pried locks, no evidence of a struggle. Nothing suggested anyone had come into the house. It was as if Emily had simply vanished into thin air. Within hours, the entire town mobilized. Flyers were printed, search teams were formed. Local volunteers, firefighters, and even high school students fanned out across Pine Hollow and its surrounding woods. Dogs were brought in from the county sheriff's office to follow her scent, but the trail stopped just past the Whitaker backyard. Police checked playgrounds, tree houses, and even storm drains. Search helicopters hovered low, scanning the dense forest that bordered the town. Still, there was no trace of her. News spread fast. Local media showed up by evening. Reporters stood outside the family home with cameras, describing Emily as a sweet, bright girl and beloved by her community. Teresa appeared on TV in tears, pleading for anyone with information to come forward. Michael stayed mostly in the background, trying to keep his composure. Daniel was barely seen. A few neighbors noted he stayed indoors most of the day, only coming out briefly before being ushered back in by his father. The police conducted interviews with family, friends, and neighbors. Everyone said the same thing. The Whitakers were a normal, happy family. Daniel and Emily got along fine. No one could imagine either of them hurting the other. But as time went on, investigators began to ask harder questions. Why were there no fingerprints other than those of the family inside the house? Why was Emily's bed made so neatly when she almost always left it messy in the mornings? And why hadn't the dogs picked up a trail outside the house? Then came the first break. Small, but important. 2 days into the investigation, officers searched the family's shed, a weathered wooden structure in the backyard used mostly for gardening tools. It was dusty, cluttered, and smelled of old paint and oil. But one officer noticed something strange, a loose wooden panel at the back wall. Behind it, stuffed into the hollow space, was Emily's backpack. It had her name embroidered on it in blue thread. Inside were her school books, a half-finished drawing, and a crumpled snack wrapper. Finding the backpack changed the tone of the investigation immediately. The fact that it was hidden, carefully tucked away, not tossed or dropped, suggested someone had deliberately placed it there. Someone who had access to the shed and knew the house well. Someone inside the family. The focus shifted inward. Police began re-interviewing the Whitakers. Daniel, in particular, was watched more closely. At first, he seemed unaffected, quiet, but calm, sitting still during questioning. But officers noted his lack of emotion. He didn't ask questions about the investigation. He didn't cry. And unlike most 14-year-olds in a traumatic situation, he didn't show signs of shock or distress. He was detached, observing everything, saying very little. They obtained a warrant to search his room. At first glance, it was immaculate. Books lined the shelves alphabetically. His computer was neatly organized. But deeper inspection revealed something odd. His internet search history had been wiped clean the morning Emily disappeared. That alone wasn't incriminating. Many kids delete their histories. But a forensic analyst recovered fragments of data that hadn't been completely erased. Among them were search terms that raised alarm: how to hide someone, missing person police time limit, and cleaning blood from wood. The family was stunned. Teresa refused to believe her son could be involved. Michael was quiet, avoiding the press and the investigators. Daniel gave no explanation. He didn't deny it. He didn't confirm it. He said nothing. As the town lit candles and held vigils for Emily, whispers began to spread. Not about strangers or kidnappers, but about Daniel. The boy everyone thought they knew. The one no one had ever suspected. Until now. In the days that followed the discovery of Emily's backpack, the tone in Pine Hollow shifted. The once hopeful community was starting to feel the weight of dread. There were no more smiling volunteers handing out flyers. The posters faded and peeled on street corners. Candlelight vigils grew quieter. People spoke in hushed voices, not wanting to believe what they were beginning to suspect. Something wasn't right in the Whitaker home. Detectives began putting more pressure on the family. They returned to the house several times, each visit longer than the last. Michael and Teresa cooperated, but Daniel remained distant. He didn't ask how the search was going. He didn't react when officers walked through his room. He sat on the edge of his bed, staring blankly ahead, hands folded in his lap. The boy who had once earned praise for his discipline now seemed eerily controlled, detached from everything happening around him. As investigators dug deeper, more unsettling details came to light. Teachers at Daniel's school were asked to revisit any unusual behavior. One remembered an essay he'd written the previous semester, where Daniel described a dream about a perfect place with no noise, no distractions, no little voices. At the time, it was dismissed as creative writing. Another teacher mentioned how Daniel never partnered with other students during group work, preferring to work alone, even when it wasn't required. He rarely socialized and never invited anyone over. His classmates had started calling him the Ghost, not out of cruelty, but because of how invisible he made himself. The search history from his computer, partially recovered, was more revealing than anyone had anticipated. Along with the searches already found, forensic analysts uncovered cached pages of crime scene cleaning guides and detailed blogs about high-profile disappearances. There were even saved links to articles about famous child abductions, including John Benet Ramsey and Elizabeth Smart. He had apparently spent hours studying what made those cases difficult to solve. What investigators found most disturbing, though, was a hidden folder tucked deep in the file directory, labeled only with a single period. Inside were dozens of text files. Most were short, rambling entries written like diary pages. They weren't dated, but they told a story. In one, he described watching Emily sleep and wondering what it would be like if she weren't there. In another, he mentioned how he felt invisible, like no one ever really saw him. The tone of the entries grew darker over time, eventually mentioning experiments and solutions. The word silence appeared repeatedly, underlined and typed in all caps in several entries. Still, despite all this, there was no direct evidence linking Daniel to Emily's disappearance. No blood, no fingerprints, no eyewitnesses. The family home had been scrubbed clean, perhaps too clean. Nothing conclusive tied him to a crime. Suspicion was not enough for an arrest. The detectives faced mounting pressure. The community wanted answers, the media was relentless, and the parents were breaking down. Teresa clung to the belief that Emily would be found alive, and that her son had nothing to do with it. Michael had grown silent, avoiding public appearances altogether. Then, a seemingly small detail turned into a pivotal moment. An elderly woman named Mrs. Connors, who lived down the road, came forward with a curious memory. She mentioned that the Whitakers used to own a second property at the edge of town, a plot of land with a small cabin and a storm cellar built decades ago. The family had sold it years earlier, but the structure was still there, hidden by overgrown trees and brush. It had long since been abandoned and forgotten. The information was passed to detectives, who immediately arranged a search. The team arrived with flashlights, cameras, and quiet urgency. The cabin was in poor condition. Rotted floorboards, sagging roof, covered in moss. But behind it, covered in vines and fallen leaves, they found the entrance to the old storm cellar. A rusted metal door lay flat on the ground, sealed with a heavy chain and a weathered padlock. With tools and effort, they forced the door open. The air that escaped was stale and cold. Flashlights illuminated the narrow stairs that led into the earth. At the bottom was a dirt floor, cracked shelves, and decaying wooden beams. In the far corner, beneath a dusty tarp, sat a wooden box no larger than a toy chest. Inside that box were the remains of a child. The discovery stopped the town in its tracks. Emily had been found, but not in the way anyone had hoped. The body was badly decomposed, but dental records confirmed her identity. The forensic team determined she had died the same night she disappeared. Beside the box, wrapped in plastic, were journals. Not notebooks, but loose pages, stacked and numbered. All written in the same neat, steady handwriting. All in Daniel's hand. The perfect boy, it seemed, had been hiding far more than anyone could have imagined. The discovery of Emily's remains changed everything. What had once been a mysterious disappearance was now officially a homicide investigation. The town of Pine Hollow, once known for its peaceful streets and friendly faces, was now the focus of regional media coverage. Police tape surrounded the abandoned property. News vans parked along the road, broadcasting live updates. And in the middle of it all was Daniel Whitaker, the boy no one could quite believe had anything to do with it. And yet the evidence kept growing. Forensic teams worked for days combing through the storm cellar. Every inch of the small, cold space was documented. They found no signs of anyone else having been there. No strange fingerprints, no foreign DNA, no evidence of outside involvement. Everything pointed inward. The wooden box had been custom built, measured precisely to fit beneath the tarp and behind the collapsed shelves. It was sealed with thick nails and lined with plastic. It was not something hastily thrown together. It had been planned. But it was the journals that spoke the loudest. There were 37 entries in total, each one written in calm, detached language. The first few were observations, daily notes about his routine, school, family. But slowly, they shifted in tone. Entry 12 described an overwhelming feeling of invisibility. He wrote about how people only paid attention to him when he did something right, never when he simply existed. Entry 19 focused entirely on Emily. He wrote that she was always in the way, too loud, too bright. He described feeling eclipsed by her presence, like a shadow cast by her constant light. Then came entry 23. It was brief. I know what has to happen. I just have to do it carefully. I want silence. From that point, the entries became more disturbing. They detailed preparations, studying human anatomy, researching missing persons cases, calculating distances between locations in town. He made lists of materials to gather, places to hide them, times of night when neighbors were least likely to be awake. There was a disturbing absence of emotion in his writing. It read more like a manual than a confession. The final entry was dated the night of October 18th. It read only, "It's done. She's quiet now. I finally understand peace." The investigators had what they needed. Daniel was arrested at home the following morning without resistance. He didn't cry. He didn't protest. He simply stood still as officers placed handcuffs around his wrists. His parents were silent. Teresa collapsed into a chair, unable to speak. Michael stood in the doorway, jaw clenched, eyes wet with disbelief. At the station, Daniel refused to answer questions. He did not ask for a lawyer. He didn't ask for his parents. He sat in the interview room, staring at the wall. The investigators tried for hours to get him to talk, to explain what had happened, but he gave them nothing. Eventually, the journals became the only confession they had. Cold, calculated pages that removed any trace of the boy they thought they knew. The town was in shock. Neighbors who once praised Daniel now struggled to understand him. His teachers questioned whether they'd missed something obvious. Parents clutched their children tighter. Church leaders held emergency services to help the community process the tragedy. But no sermon could explain how a child so seemingly good could commit something so unthinkable. The court ruled that Daniel would be tried as an adult. The prosecution argued that the level of planning, the documentation, and the deliberate steps taken before and after the crime showed a mind fully aware of its actions. The defense tried to argue for diminished capacity, hinting at mental illness or childhood trauma, but there was no clinical evidence strong enough to support that claim. Psychologists who evaluated Daniel described him as emotionally flat, intellectually gifted, and socially isolated, but not legally insane. During the trial, the courtroom sat in stunned silence as the journals were read aloud. Page after page, the voice of a boy who should have been thinking about math homework and baseball practices revealed a chilling glimpse into a private world shaped by resentment and obsession. He never looked up during the readings. He kept his eyes on the table, unmoved by the tears in the gallery or the judge's stern tone. The jury found him guilty of first-degree murder. The judge sentenced him to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 25 years. At the time of sentencing, Daniel was just 15 years old. He would serve his sentence in a juvenile facility until the age of 18, then be transferred to an adult prison. Pine Hollow was left scarred. The Whitaker home was abandoned within months. The front yard grew wild. Windows were boarded up. No one mowed the lawn. No one dared to move in. It stood as a quiet monument to everything the town had lost. The golden boy of Pine Hollow had become its darkest memory. Years passed, but the name Daniel Whitaker never left the whispers of Pine Hollow. Though the case had closed and justice, in the eyes of the law, had been served, the emotional wreckage left behind remained. The once quiet town had become a symbol of shattered illusions, a place where innocence had been broken not by a stranger, but by someone who was supposed to represent it. Daniel was transferred to a high-security juvenile facility on the outskirts of the state. Life inside was nothing like Pine Hollow. The strict routines, the bare walls, the constant surveillance. It should have broken someone so young. But Daniel adapted quickly. Staff noted his behavior as compliant and unemotional. He followed orders, never caused trouble, and spent most of his free time reading. Over time, he earned privileges others didn't. He was allowed access to books from the prison library, restricted shelves, and eventually began tutoring other juveniles in math and science. What disturbed the staff most wasn't what Daniel said, but what he didn't. In group therapy, he listened, but rarely spoke. When asked about Emily, or the events of that October night, he would stare ahead and remain silent. Even when encouraged to express regret, there was no response. He wasn't defiant. He was just empty. Back in Pine Hollow, life continued in pieces. Teresa and Michael divorced within 2 years of Daniel's conviction. Michael moved away quietly, settling in a town hours away, rarely seen again. Teresa stayed for a while, keeping Emily's room exactly as it had been. The books untouched, the drawings still pinned to the wall. Neighbors tried to support her, bringing food, offering company, but she became increasingly withdrawn. One winter, she simply packed a bag and left. The Whitaker house was later sold to the county, deemed uninhabitable after years of neglect. The town itself tried to heal, but scars lingered. Parents grew more watchful. Schools implemented new mental health programs. The playground where Emily used to draw in the sand was refurbished and renamed Emily S. Garden, with a small plaque honoring her life. Every year on the anniversary of her disappearance, the community gathered there for a candlelight vigil. No one spoke of Daniel. His name was rarely said aloud, as though giving it air might bring the nightmare back. But outside Pine Hollow, Daniel's story had begun to attract attention. True crime blogs picked up the case, dubbing it the Whitaker Paradox, a tale of a boy who had everything going for him, yet chose to destroy the one person closest to him. Documentaries followed. One podcast series dissected every journal entry, bringing psychologists and criminologists on to analyze his words. Some described him as a cold-blooded predator. Others wondered if the signs had always been there and were simply ignored. A few years into his sentence, a journalist named Claire Benton requested an interview with Daniel. To everyone's surprise, he agreed. The recorded conversation was stark and unsettling. He never raised his voice. He never fidgeted. When asked why he did it, he offered no excuse, no dramatic confession. He said only, "She was too loud inside my head." The interview went viral, sparking debate about youth criminal justice and how society fails to recognize psychological red flags in children. Letters poured in, some from people expressing sympathy, others filled with hatred. Daniel responded to none. At age 18, Daniel was transferred to an adult correctional facility. It made national headlines. A photograph was taken of him during the transfer, handcuffed, eyes still expressionless. He looked older, but not changed. Just a taller version of the boy who once played baseball and helped carry groceries for neighbors. The contrast between who he had been and what he had done remained impossible to reconcile. For the families who had once admired the Whitakers, the story served as a chilling reminder that appearances could be deceiving. No one knew what darkness someone might carry, even behind the kindest smile. Many former neighbors moved away, trying to leave the memories behind. But Pine Hollow could never forget. The story was part of its soil now, rooted in every street, every corner, every whisper. Daniel Whitaker became eligible for parole at age 40. Whether he would be released or remain behind bars was a question that no one in Pine Hollow liked to ask. They had moved on the best they could, but some doors once opened never truly closed. And some stories, even when they end, leave echoes that never quite fade. He was just a boy. Until that night changed everything.